Claire, you're at the top of my screen, so I'll ask you first. 2 minutes opening statement, please.
Thank you. I always get asked first because my name comes first. I'm starting to realise this is both an advantage and a disadvantage. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us and for organising this event. And it's great that the questions are coming from the members of the public. So I hope it's a really good opportunity, not just to be a little sort of talking shop amongst people, the four of us who meet to have these hustings every now and again. But it's great that that we're getting kind of audience participation and questions from local residents. So I'm really happy about that. It's great to be here, and you're all giving up a lovely sunny evening when we can now actually go back to pubs to come and talk to us. So I'm really grateful for that, and I hope that what we give you this evening will be helpful to you. I think we know that we all have a part to play now in tackling the climate emergency. None of us can say now that we didn't know the facts. We know the facts, and I think we actually have a great opportunity to think radically and think differently now. COVID has reshaped the way we work across London, across the country, across the world. And, people said about things they couldn't be done. And it's proved this year that actually things can be done. If there's a real will to make things happen, things can be done. And I hope that we're able to now seize this opportunity to actually make real radical changes. I think especially in lockdown, people are now more aware than ever of the need to protect our green spaces, to clean our air, and to create high streets that are really vibrant and that allow us to kind of be proud of the place where we live and where our communities are really at the heart of where we are. As Liberal Democrats, we've got a green recovery plan, and we're planning to clean up our air in a way that supports our economy and is fair to everybody. And that's, to me, really important, that we put in measures that are fair to everybody and don't end up penalising people because they can't afford a fancy electric car or whatever. We need to be fair to everybody. That's going to be through a number of ways, whether that's through scrapping polluting road projects and actually introducing road pricing, whether that's through supporting cycling, walking, greening our bus fleet, whether that's through rewilding London in a way that protects our green spaces. We believe that we've got a plan to take London forward and ensure that this opportunity doesn't go to waste and that we can make real and lasting change. And I'm sure that we'll have some really good ideas coming through from this evening, and I look forward to taking part in the debate.
Sorry, brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. Peter, if you could start and give your statement. 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep it brief. Those of you who know me well know I always have plenty to say, but hopefully we'll have more time for questions if I spend less time talking. The climate environmental emergency is the biggest threat that humanity faces. We don't have any choice about acting. We have a duty to ourselves, we have a duty to everybody else on the country and in the rest of the world, and we have a duty to future generations. We can't carry on as we have done before. We have to change the way we're working. Similarly, with everything going on in the last year, the disasters of Brexit and COVID and the sort of chaos that they've caused, now is a chance to start again. We very rarely get that opportunity as a society. It's a chance for a new start, a new way of thinking. We don't have to go back to the old normal. The old normal didn't work for everybody, and the old normal was destroying the planet and the environment around us. So going back to that isn't an option either. So we've got to come forward with those new plans. Now, the Green Party, we've been talking about this for decades. We've been putting forward policies for this for decades. We've got plans in place, and has been shown through the last year, sort of, this is the time we've got to implement them. If not now, when? This is when we say we've got to take those actions. Unfortunately, well, I've seen some greening coming through in some of the other parties, but too often we just see that those are pushed out of the way when other priorities come forwards, whether that's airport expansion, road building, building an incinerator, or just profit, where people just think profit is more important than anything else. The Green Party through and through, the environment, caring about the climate, that's the lens that we look through about how we frame our policies, how we move things forwards. Now, yeah, that we can't have environmental justice without social justice. So that means about taking people with us. It means about caring for people at all levels of society to make sure that we create a better world for everybody. But that has got to be the focus. And we're the ones you can trust to do that. So, as I said, I look forward to the questions, and thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Patsy, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and I too would like to thank you for this opportunity to talk about arguably the most important issue we all face today. My campaign is based on values that I think all of us here and everyone in Croydon Sutton share, and that's community, it's fairness, and it's justice. And it's clear that none of these can be properly addressed without tackling climate change, delivering a green economy, and the time to talk is over. It's time to act. And it's a time for London politicians to act, to look at what's not working and to expand or develop what will achieve real change. Our young people get it, and many activists get it. But so many of our community are struggling with just the day-to-day pressures, food poverty, huge fuel bills, inequalities built into our institutions. The connection between these issues with the climate emergency we all face must be made so that these solutions work hand in hand, and we must do this together. The majority want to see climate change addressed, and I believe that the people of Croydon Sutton have more in common in how we tackle these issues together. Not just top down, but grassroots in all communities. Everyone has a part to play and a valuable role in protecting our environment. I've got to say the Tories have had 10 years to make the progress needed to tackle climate change, but they failed to do so and shown an unwillingness to act with speed. I know not everyone here today is a natural Labour supporter, and indeed not everyone in Croydon Sutton is a Labour voter, but the choice of who will represent Croydon Sutton in City Hall is probably between me and the Conservative candidate, and I hope this evening I will earn your trust on the key issues and earn your support on the 6th of May. So I'm hoping to tackle as many of your questions as possible, so I'll end it there so we can get more questions in. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. Neil, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for organising the hustings this evening and for inviting us all along. I suspect there'll be quite a lot of detail that we'll get into, so I'd like later on this evening. So I'd like to open, if I may, in very broad terms by talking about threats and opportunities. Seems to me the vast majority of people in Croydon and Sutton and far beyond are on board with tackling climate change. I think my concern is the conversations are often framed in very threatening terms. And while the alarming statistics are true, I worry that when people feel terrified or hopeless or overwhelmed, I think there's a danger that people give up. I think to succeed in creating the clean economy that we need, I think we need to bring people with us. And to do that, we need to talk about the opportunities and also about our successes. And I think that's the way that we build the optimism and the motivation for change. I mean, I'm personally quite optimistic about that clean future. I think I'm optimistic about our part in the UK and in London, in both setting an example and in taking advantage of the opportunities that that clean future creates. For example, in the last decade, the UK has cut its carbon emissions by over a quarter, and that is more than any other major economy. And I think it's important that people understand that we have made progress, because it builds motivation for further progress. And I think UK carbon emissions are already below the European average. They're much lower than Germany and much lower than the Netherlands. And so although there is more to do, such as with the government's new commitment today to 78% reduction in carbon by 2035, I think it's by reminding people what we've already achieved and by positioning ourselves in the UK and in London as a world leader in clean industry, I think that's how we get there. I think that's how we get there together. And that's how we benefit from being in the vanguard, in leading the way to that clean future. And so my view is less stick and more carrot, and they can be zero carbon eco carrots, but I'm certain that it is carrots that will power us to that clean future that we need. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil. I'm going to move on to the questions now. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to their question. When your 90 seconds is up, I will raise my hand. Can you see that little emoticon just there? And if you could either wrap things up or just completely end things there, that would be brilliant. Could I also ask all candidates to make sure that they are speaking as clearly as possible, and when they're not speaking, to mute themselves just in case there's any background noise. Brilliant. So I'll start straight with the first question. Me and my younger brother watch a lot of wildlife programs and feel sad when we see trees being cut down or animals in trouble. Humans are doing so much damage to our planet. How can we stop them? That was from one of our younger respondents, and the order that I've got is for Neil to answer first. So Neil.
Thank you. I mean, I think, I have 3 children, 2 at primary school, 1 at high school. So I'm certainly familiar with, I think, what can sometimes be a childlike but very true way of seeing the world and seeing a truth in, damage to the environment, damage to wildlife, ecosystems, and to biodiversity. In terms of how we stop it, I think it can be quite difficult. So some of the problems that we read about, such as plastic pollution in the oceans, often those are coming from countries where release of waste is not so well managed as it is here. So our waste is mostly collected and disposed of safely. I think what we can do, particularly when we're thinking about around the world, is to think about what tends to be called ethical consumerism. So how the things that we buy influence the kinds of activities that go on in other parts of the world where we don't directly control what goes on there, but by choosing companies that produce goods, provide services in an environmentally friendly way, who are conscious of these problems, it helps us to reduce the impact that we're having, and it helps to encourage those companies that are doing the right thing to continue to do the right thing. Sorry, it says you're having trouble hearing me, is that right? Someone in the comments?
Someone
Can I shout louder?
It's low volume. I can make it out, but it's low volume. So if anyone's got noise behind them, it's not going to be very clear.
Yeah.
Cool. Me and my younger brother watch a lot of wildlife programs and feel sad when we see trees being cut down or animals in trouble. Humans are doing so much damage to our planet. How can we stop them? Claire?
Sorry, you cut out when you said the name of who was.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. I mean, that's a very big question. It's a very important question, and it's a very big question, and it's got a very big answer, which we can't cover in 90 seconds. But I think there's several things. We need to, as Neil said, we need to kind of invest in companies that are doing, trying their best to make a difference. We also need to think about what we consume and to consume less and to do things differently, because if we carry on the way we're going, it doesn't matter how much, how many kind of clever technologies and things we have, we're just going to be trying to, make up for a problem that we're creating, but, creating carbon emissions and then having to deal with that and, minimize them. So we do have to look very carefully about how we actually consume and what we consume. And as, a kind of nation in the West who've had all the advantages in life, in developing ahead of other countries, we need to be aware that we need to take the lead on that. And we, I agree with what Neil said earlier. It's got to be carrot and not, more carrot and stick. We have to make people want to do these things. And people like David Attenborough have done wonders for this, and Greta Thunberg have done wonders for this. But we need to not only get people to understand why it's a big issue, and I think people do understand that now, but we need to give them easy ways to tackle it. As Neil said, sometimes people get scared by the problem, and I think we need to do this in so many different ways. And we've got to start with us and thinking about what we consume and how we can consume differently, I think.
Thank you very much. Peter, if you could answer this question.
Yeah, this is sort of related to my job because I work in environment conservation both here in Croydon and up in Scotland. I work for the rewilding charity Trees for Life, which is about rewilding the areas there, both in terms of plants and animal species, and restoring that. The key thing, I think, is we have to take responsibility. We can't keep blaming other countries or saying it's somebody else's problem. We have to sort our own house in order first, which is we're not doing. The first thing is education. People need to understand that it is a problem. Too many people have been brought up with old attitudes where they felt they could use nature, not realise we're part of it. So they need to understand why they shouldn't be doing it. Equally, the social pressure is that attitudes have been changing, and we need to build that so that campaigns against things like drink driving, which used to be seen as acceptable, there was a build-up of social pressure, and it was people talking about it and realizing how bad it was how you brought about those attitude changes that now it's seen quite rightly as a bad thing to do. So it isn't just a legal change, it's just social change. But you do need those structural changes as well. So it's about bringing in changes to our planning system, and our codes that we apply, so that we stop unnecessary damage, that we sort of, the environmental impact has to be assessed as part of activities that businesses undertake, planning developments, things like that. And also then you do need the legal backup. We talked about setting up a habitat crime unit that specialises specifically in these crimes against nature, because in London we can't afford for this to carry on. We have little enough green space, little enough natural world left, so we've got to protect it with police activities as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Patsy, the same question to you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with some of what's already been said. It is down to us. The West should lead on this, and we shouldn't be talking about poor countries, because we need to support them in so many different ways. We need to grow more locally instead of transporting things and the footprint and taking things across the world. We can do that. I'm pleased where this question came from, because the young people get it. And it's about making sure all of us in so many different ways get involved in this whole climate emergency. And that's about information. I think Peter mentioned education, but it's about information. And it's actually not, to me, a carrot and stick. It's about working together. It's not just the politicians, not just the activists, it's working with communities. The poorest of our communities, communities of colour, are the ones that are actually affected by climate change the most. And some of the things that they are working on day to day, just by, you know, being able to live and heat their homes and putting food on the table, things that we could do that will help with the climate emergency, will help the community in all of those sort of respects, where that's where the value is coming in terms of fairness. So planting more trees, looking at waste. Recycling rates in Croydon have gone up, I think by 46 to 49%. We need to do more of that. There's so many issues, and 90 seconds is not enough. I think I agree with Claire there, but there is so much that we can do together. And I think it's about putting those policies in place, working with the community, making sure the community have a voice in these decisions. And I don't want to do carrot and stick. I want to work together hand in hand.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Our second question is about a slightly contentious issue, and it reads: the Beddington incinerator burns waste that could instead be recycled, and the Environment Agency figures suggest it produces more carbon dioxide per unit of electricity it generates than a coal power station. How would you ensure London's incinerators operate in a way that keeps emissions and local pollution to a minimum? And Peter, if you could answer that first, please.
Just about to write some notes, I might as well just launch straight into it. The Green Party's campaigned against the incinerator right from the start, despite the other parties all pushing it through. It's the wrong approach, completely. Just burning waste is a filthy thing to do. It's a bad way of dealing with waste. It's a filthy way of producing electricity. We just shouldn't be doing it. We should be focusing on reducing waste. Yes, you can talk about increasing recycling rates, but there's too much waste in the first place. So we've got to focus on getting waste down. We've got to look at how we deal with it to produce that more circular economy. So we've got to tackle the producers. So they're producing goods that can be reused, recycled, the right to repair. So you have machinery and materials that you can actually repair and keep going rather than just throwing them away. And yes, and landfill is actually more environmentally friendly than burning it. Much as I want to reduce landfill as well, we've got to focus on the real issues here. And so yes, we need to close the incinerator down. If the councils in Sutton and Croydon have both declared a climate emergency, to meet that, we can't have the incinerator still operating. So we've got to start plans now to actually reduce the waste, find different ways of dealing with it, improve recycling rates, improve reuse rates. But yeah, the key thing is the incineration got to start. It shouldn't have been built in the first place. And yeah, we've got to move to closing it down. The same is true for the other incinerators across London. We shouldn't be building any more. We have too much capacity already. And it's just producing toxic air that's killing people. So yeah, just stop it.
Thank you very much. Patsy,
Thank you. And I think Peter said it. Burning rubbish into the air, toxic waste, is not the thing to do. I've got Labour colleagues in Sutton who, in opposition of the incinerator in Benton Lane, and I'm with them. If I was in control, it would not have happened. So it's not necessarily just the local authorities. It's some of us are fighting against these things, and a lot of us have been. So I agree, we shouldn't be doing it. We should invest in renewable energy, in solar power, in wind, in geothermals. We should be doing all of that sort of stuff, and recycling rates, of course, trying to get it up to 100%. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Peter, you're the expert, but we, I think, with the Green Party and with the Lib Dems to a large extent, we agree on so much of these things. Although, Claire, I don't know what you're going to say because of the council. I won't go there. But yeah, we just need to do things better. And decisions that were made that may have been incorrect in the past, let's see how we can change them. Let's see how we can actually improve them. So yeah, incinerator, no. Renewable energy, better way of doing, better way of working, yes.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Neil.
Sorry, I lost my mute button for a moment there. I'm trying to speak louder than I was last time. So for those of you who don't know, I'm actually a councillor in Sutton, where the incinerator is, although it's right on the boundary with Croydon. In Sutton, the Conservatives voted against the planning application, which was approved by the Liberal Democrats, although, as Peter rightly says, it's been a bit of a merry-go-round of people supporting and opposing. I have to say, I've always been quite sceptical of the environmental claims about incineration, and I'm quite interested in Peter's point that landfill ends up being more environmentally sustainable. In terms of the emissions, I think it's worth bearing in mind that the emissions not only include the incinerator itself, they include all of the lorries bringing all of the waste and all of the lorries taking all of the ash away at the end of it. It seems, I think the difficulty is what we actually do, because many of you may be aware that in 2014, the Labour Party in Croydon made an election promise that if they were elected to run Croydon, they would not go ahead with the incinerator plan, and they were elected in 2014 and they went ahead with the incinerator plan. Within months, they abandoned it. And I think my concern is that it's very easy for those of us who are not in a decision-making position to make a promise that we're not able to keep. It seems to me it would be quite a difficult thing to get rid of. I don't know how we go about doing it, but to me, having what is essentially a power station sitting in a built-up area with all of those trucks bringing waste and ash in and out, and with the recent the point about it being the emissions being as toxic as a coal-fired power station, I think is deeply concerning. All I can say is that I have a track record that you can see of challenging Sutton Council, where it exists, over the environmental impact of it, and also about, I think, the tendency of Sutton Council to act as a Viridor comms team, which drives me up the wall. I've made that point privately and in public. All I can say is that I will continue to challenge Viridor over the actual environmental impact of it, and continue to see what we can do to find an alternative. My fear is that now that it's there, it will continue to be there, and that they will find somebody to send waste to it as long as it is.
Thank you, Neil. And finally, Claire.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously it's a difficult one. If Sutton Council is a Lib Dem council and they put this in, but I mean, I think one of the things is, you have to make difficult choices, and there are no good choices in this situation. And I think, obviously I know that this is a difficult one for us, but going back to Peter's point, we need to actually not need an incinerator or landfill. That is the point. There are other advantages to having it over a landfill, but and I could sit here and argue, but I don't want to, because I don't think either of them are good ideas. But we need to reduce. I mean, there are fewer lorries actually going to Bennington Lane now than there were when there was landfill, and obviously it releases CO2, but it releases less methane. So I think there's no good way of getting rid of the waste, and this is not ideal. And knowing what we know, now, I don't, in other parts of London, the policy is not to, for Lib Dems is not to approve new incinerators. I think, I would definitely agree of not producing any new ones. So I think it's a difficult issue, and I don't think we've got it all right. But it's kind of taking decisive action, and that's what you've got to do when you're in charge. There's not many places we're in charge, but in Sutton we took some hard leadership decisions, and that's what we decided to do. Whether we can get rid of it, I do not know. But I think the point we need to be working towards is that we don't actually need either an incinerator or landfill, because neither of those are good options.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Moving on to the next question. What measures would you support to reduce transport emissions in London? And the first person that opens to is Claire.
Sorry, I forget the mute button. I do it at least once during every hustings. So there are several things that we would do, and greening the bus fleet is one of those things. And we've actually, wanting to do that by 2028, which is, I think, quicker than most of the other parties. We'd also like to prioritise buses that serve red routes. Because these are where some of London's poorest residents suffer from the highest rates of pollution. And Patsy's absolutely right that disadvantaged communities are actually more affected, disproportionately affected by climate change. So that's what we want to do. We also want to encourage more walking and cycling. I guess that kind of might come up as a later question. So one of the things we would be doing is offering free Santander cycles on Sunday, so that it's free for anybody to try, and extending the range further out. But I think it's got to be a package of measures and lots of different measures to do this, because not everybody, one form of transport is not going to be suitable for everybody. But we would definitely want to green our public transport as much as possible and as quickly as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. The next person, Neil.
Thank you. I think greening the bus fleet, going to a zero emissions bus fleet, seems to be something that everybody agrees on. I think we have in our manifesto have committed 2025. I suspect it's not so much about the date as about just making progress towards making that happen. I think an area that really needs exploring more, has a lot of potential, is what tends to be termed micro mobility, so electric scooters and e-bikes. I think I mentioned earlier I have an e-bike, huge fan. It's basically replaced my car. And we've now become a 2 e-bike family here. In fact, this is the problem with buying an e-bike, is you become an e-bike salesman accidentally. I think electric scooters, there's a bit of a trial going on in a few areas. I think my view is they probably need to be legalized, regularized with similar sort of framework to e-bikes, the power and speed limits and so on. I think they've got a great deal of potential to replace those sort of medium distance journeys of a few miles that lots of people make, often from point to point, where they tend to use their car, where buses can be a bit inconvenient and walking it's a bit too far. So I'm really quite enthusiastic about the possibilities of that. I think the other big question is around cars. I think there's a tendency to try and see cars as something that needs to be eliminated. My concern is in a place like Croydon and Sutton, outside of the very town centres of Croydon and possibly Sutton, I think we are essentially a suburban area where public transport and population density doesn't support a public transport network that would allow everyone to go car free. So I think a challenge is not so much about eliminating cars, but thinking about how we can integrate cars in a way that's more sustainable. So for example, I'm quite interested in what Japan has done for a long time with their so-called Kei cars, these sort of small city cars that reduce land use, reduce emissions. I think they have some quite interesting possibilities that have more likelihood of taking people with us than just trying to get rid of them completely.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And finally, oh, not finally, next, Peter.
Yeah, Patsy should have a go as well. In terms of reducing, we do have to reduce car transport. There's no option on that. Cars produce toxic fumes, carbon. We've got to reduce the number of car journeys. And the way we do it, we provide alternatives. And one of them is providing a public transport network. Because public transport networks are not based on how much profit it makes. It's a public service. It should be publicly funded. TfL in London is the only major city in the world where we're not subsidised, because the Conservatives decided it got to pay for itself, which has been a disaster for our public transport system. It needs to be paid for through our general taxation. So we need better public transport. We need to encourage walking and cycling. That means safer roads. Low traffic neighbourhoods figure in that. They're not a single solution on their own, but they are part of the solution. We need to look at those. We also need to look at things like the Sutton tram extension, which has been promised by previous mayor candidates time after time after time. We need to look at that seriously. If it seems to work, so as an idea, so we need to look at it and actually get it built, because the tram in Croydon has been a fantastic success at getting people out of cars and people using public transport. The other key thing is reducing the need to travel. We're looking at the 15-minute city model, which is the idea that you've got your local shops, your school, places to work, all within easy walking, cycling distance. So you're not having to travel further distances. During lockdown, this has sort of started to happen already, where people have started using their local shops. It puts life back into local communities. It's a fantastic thing anyway, but it also reduces that need for travel. It reduces the need to use the car, and so therefore reduces emissions. So there's lots of things I'm sure we could all talk about a bit further on that, but that's probably enough from me for now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Patsy.
Thank you. And yes, I'm going to stop saying I agree with Peter, because Peter, you're not going to get any more kudos from me, because you're green, and I know we would work really well together. We do need to get people out of cars. And it's not just about saying that therefore people need to get electric cars, because the poorest in our societies can't even afford an old car, let alone an electric car. So we need to make public transport better, cheaper, safer. We need to make sure our environments are better, so there's cycle lanes. And it's not just temporary ones, we need to actually make them work. Other cities do it, we can do it too. And out of London boroughs, we've got Croydon Sutton, we can do things better. We need to make sure that we give people incentives and bring the power back down to the people. We need devolution, we need local people to actually have control of their local areas. I'm part of a scheme in my particular ward where the local people, we've got a bit of money from the GLA and from Historic England, and we are making decisions about our area locally with all the people in the area, a town team that's representing everybody, residents, businesses, community groups, residents association, and it's about therefore how we try to look at changing our spaces and places. It's difficult just to do it in one ward, but as a representative in City Hall, I try to do it across the piece. And safe spaces around our schools, our young people with the emissions. It's just absolutely wrong that we are exposing our young people to bad air, toxic air. I've spoken to, and I've sat in a room with Rosamond, whose daughter Ella died, and she made this humongous achievement by getting her death certificate changed so that it reflected that her daughter died because of toxic air, because we need to make a change. So it's really important. So getting people out of cars, better transport, electric cars, making it so that the 15-minute city is one thing, but making sure that our environment is better, but putting some practical things in place, incentives, making sure the government can find the money to do this. Who would have thought they would have found billions or trillions of pounds to do the things that we had to do, protect our communities pre-pandemic? They can do it. So let's try and do that, especially for maintaining the clean air. And that's the whole piece around climate emergency and climate change actions and issues. So again, it's there's a lot more that can be said. But yeah, there's a lot more that can be done. And the money is there. The government needs to release it so that we can make some changes.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Moving on to question 4. Do you support a just transition to net zero? And if so, how would you ensure specific groups such as those on low incomes are not overburdened by the necessary changes? Patsy, you first.
Thank you. Justice and fairness is my mantra. So we cannot make the poorest in our society and people of colour to be the ones that have the burden, that can't necessarily always have the resources to do the right thing. And people want to do the right thing, all of us. So we need to make, I mean, it sort of goes on to what I was saying at the latter end of the last question, how we support our families and our communities to make the changes they need to make. There's a whole raft of incentives that we can develop, and sorry, I've just seen somebody put something in the chat. But how we go about that, I think it's about all of us coming together to put some of these policies in position. So I would like us not to do things across party. I would like us to actually work together in some of those issues, because Peter and the Green Party have so many different issues and solutions that we share in the Labour Party, and I'd like us to work together on some of those issues. I'm sounds I'm rambling on, so I'm going to stop it there, because I think I want to actually, the hand's gone up.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Peter.
Straightforward answer to the question, yes, of course I support a just transition. There should be no other form of transition. That it's got, as Patsy said, it's got to be a just transition. The problems with the system we have at the moment is the fact that it was built on disadvantaging people who already had disadvantages. That we've got to end that, we've got to reverse that. And there's been a lot of work put into creating a just transition. That's about providing the training, providing the education, so that people can find these new jobs. The whole Green New Deal is based around providing lots of new greener jobs that people can move into, that help people economically as well as environmentally. And so, yes, it's targeting those communities who suffered in the past and helping them, because after all, it is the rich and the powerful who create more of the climate problem. Their carbon footprint is enormous compared to the average person, never mind a lot of people who are sort of in more disadvantaged circumstances. We did quite a bit of work of this on the Croydon Climate Crisis Commission. I always struggle with the 4 Cs, and looking at how we do that within Croydon itself in terms of how we work with colleges and work with educational establishments and different businesses to move that just transition. It's something we should be taking the lead on and being as an example to other boroughs, other areas, and as London, we should be doing it as a city, showing that we can make that transition and that people can be better off through doing it.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Neil.
Thanks. I'd like to take a slightly different tack from the others, if I may, not to disagree so much as to, I think, bring out a couple of issues that often get ignored. One is about land cost near public transport. So it may surprise you, you might have a lot of stereotypes about Conservatives. I grew up on a council estate, and like a lot of council estates, it was on the edge of town where I suppose land was cheaper when they were building it. That means it's less accessible to public transport. So the public transport infrastructure that gets built is often not built in the place where less well-off people are. And when new infrastructure goes in, the price goes up, and so you get better off people moving in. And so this is one of the reasons why people who are less well-off often, and particularly if they're working shifts, as both my parents did and as I have done, often have cars to get around. And I think one of the issues about, for example, some of the, the road pricing, congestion charging, and so on, it has benefits in terms of the environment. But what I worry about is that it leaves a situation where we have a lot of people priced off the road. So the roads are nice and empty for rich people to drive around on in new cars that meet the latest emission standards, and less well-off people either can't afford to have a car, can't afford to park it somewhere, or can't afford to drive it if they do. And that is all related to, I think, a bigger issue, which is about damaging the economy and losing people's jobs, because if people can't get to work, all of the things we talk about this evening pretty much cost money, whether it's improving insulation, improving transport, whether it's people spending their own money or taxes being raised to spend public money. If the money isn't being generated in the economy and if people are losing their jobs, all of those things become much more difficult, and all of that transition to a clean economy becomes more difficult. And the less well-off people, who are possibly physically and literally living on the edge, are the people who struggle most in a world where everyone is presumed to be living near public transport and can just hop on a train.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And finally, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to what Patsy was saying, one of the things that I would be very keen to, whether that's at a London level or national level or probably both, is to actually have this conversation, because we're all, I know we're here because we're panelists and we've been asked to speak, about this, but actually it's not about what we think, it's about what the community at large think. And climate assemblies, citizens assemblies are the kind of places we need to go, because actually often we think that the solutions are all going to come from kind of top down, very whizzy technology or government initiatives, but often local communities have the answers to some of these issues themselves. It's not a case of we're there to tell everybody what the answers are and they will fall in line. So it needs to be a co-created process and a national conversation. I do feel that as I've already said, I am totally aware of the idea that a lot of technologies will be out of reach for a lot of people, and electric cars, you know, electric bikes, for example. I mean, I also have electric bikes, fantastic, but I can afford to buy one. You know, and this is not going to necessarily be the same for everybody. And so I do think there's a value in kind of starting the conversation at the ground level and actually getting people to help come up with the solutions themselves, because too often we think that we can just tell everybody, we've found the answer, this is it. I do think education is a really important part as well, as we've already mentioned tonight, you know, because actually, although I've said, you know, some of the solutions will come from the ground up, a lot will come from new technologies, new kind of ways of operating. And actually, we need to be getting the younger generation now, the guys who are at school and who are going to go on to have careers in tech and things like that, to understand how important this is. And I would disagree slightly with two things Neil has said. So I see the hand's gone up. One is, you know, I think road pricing is a fairer way of doing it. If people pollute more, they should pay more. I just think that's fair. But I appreciate that we need to think of clever ways of doing that which don't penalise people. And I forgot what the other thing I was going to say is, so I will leave it there.
Thank you so much. To the final of our questions, the question reads, for London to reach net carbon zero, what do you think the main focus should be for A, the London Assembly and local government, and B, businesses, and C, households? So I'll read that one again. For London to reach net zero carbon, what do you think the main focus should be for A, the London Assembly and local government, B, businesses, and C, households? And the first person to answer is Neil.
Blimey, 30 seconds on each of those three. That's a tough ask. I think to go in reverse order, I think some of the household issues I touched on before about thinking about the products we buy, the things we consume, where they come from and how they were produced. I think the big challenge that remains, I spoke at the beginning about some of the successes we've had. A lot of those relate to power generation, electricity generation. I think one of the big challenges that we still have yet to figure out a solution to or get going with is domestic heating. I think that's a big challenge, how we switch from millions of houses across London heated by gas boilers. For business, I think the answer is related to the households question, which is for them to think how they can source the source materials that they use in a better way. I think personally, I'm in favor of a carbon tax, which sort of embeds the cost of carbon in the economy, so that rather than being hidden or having to be picked out specifically with sort of particular incentives or penalties, I think by putting a carbon tax into the economy, you make it much easier to work out where carbon emissions are happening and where they're not, and people will automatically be sort of guided away. For the GLA, I think it's probably two things. One is a lot of stuff around transport, which we've probably covered in quite some detail already. I think the other is thinking about how the GLA can incentivize those businesses to A, to switch towards a more environmentally sustainable mode of business, and B, for those businesses that are doing technology and innovation, how they can come up with the solutions to the problem that we need that get us to that clean future.
Brilliant, 90 seconds on the mark. Second person is Patsy.
Thank you. Households. Let's support households to do the things that they need to do so they can actually support the changes that we need to make. So if there was insulation across the board in all of our homes, the money's there. We've done different things with regard to the pandemic. And then households, mothers wouldn't have to choose between eating and heating. Then they will go on to, with information and walking together along all of this with their children who get it, to make some different changes. In terms of businesses, we need to incentivize businesses and again, make sure they understand the differences between doing the right thing, so that they don't have a bag of cookies that's in a box that's in the plastic. So we don't have to do that. So you can buy your fruit and veg and your cereals and just bring your jar and do it. And the footprint that would eliminate is quite vast. We need to make sure that our businesses take some of those things forward, but we need to give them incentives. And if the government can do that, it actually does make things better. It took a long time for the national wage to come about, but the the living wage is the most sensible thing to do. It has economic benefits and it's a moral thing to do. And lots of businesses do it, but it's still voluntary. We need to actually get the information so people do the right thing. And someone's put in the chat, Liz, she's put local communities always have the answer. And that's absolutely right. We need to bring everybody together. And the local authority is the GLA. We all need to work with the communities, and it can't be top down. It's got to be grassroots. It's got to be those that have the information and the knowledge as well. And we've got to try and work together to make some of these changes. But all of those changes are possible, and we've got to do them fast. But we need to make sure that everybody's committed on doing all of this stuff, and it's doable. We need to do it.
Thank you, Patsy. Claire.
Great. So I think there's several things, and it's all multi-layered, and none of these things exist in isolation. So it's not like the GLA will do one thing and the households will do another, because it is all interconnected. But I think from the GLA perspective, we could do things that we've already spoken about. So to things like road pricing, scrapping the Silvertown tunnel. We can take actual actions to kind of change things at a London level, and we can also do things like we're suggesting rewilding, so putting green roofs on every new building in London. The GLA and the mayor does have the powers to do some of those things. I think another way is just by leading by example. Actually, should we have a kind of should City Hall be vegan one day a week or something, or only serve vegan food that there are ways in which people can lead by example by their actions, and then kind of show people that it can be done. I think in terms of businesses, I've remembered what I was going to disagree with Neil about earlier, or not disagree, but to kind of comment on, was actually I think we need to get past this idea where we think that green businesses is somehow a second-rate form of of income generation, or we need to, green technology and green businesses are big business and they are the way forward. So I don't think we should be sort of writing them off and saying they won't generate enough income for us to be able to afford to do all of these things. They are, because if consumers buy what they're offering, or businesses buy what they're offering, they are it's as good a form as any other. It's a new technology, it's a new way of going. I think one of the things businesses can do better is actually to work together, which now after COVID, I think people are much more kind of engaged in that. So for example, where I live in Crystal Palace, which is right at the top of Croydon, the triangle, the roads are always really, really choked up. And I'd love it if the businesses work together, because the small little delivery vans are going around to come up with a solution to maybe have a delivery point somewhere else, and then use electric vehicles to deliver goods. One thing on households, air source heat pumps and other such forms of heating, we're all just wedded to our gas-fired boilers. There's no reason to do that. There's excellent technology out there that could be different. So again, incentivizing or educating households to know what's out there, I think would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Claire. And finally, Peter.
Okay. I always believe power comes from the bottom up, shouldn't come from the top down. So I'd start off with the household level. First thing people need is information. People want to do the right thing, but they often don't know how. So providing people with the information so they can make those choices, but then learning from them where they're prevented from it because they can't afford it or it's not being offered to them. And it's those obstacles that we then need to push back up so that they go up to businesses and to the London Assembly to, well, this is getting in the way. How do we fix that? Similarly for businesses, not all business is bad. Sometimes it's portrayed as producing all of the nasty packaging and things like that. Simply the information needs to go to businesses about better ways of doing things. And we need to put money into businesses that are helping produce the solutions. So there are companies working on biodegradable packaging or reducing packaging or, reducing transport for business needs. So we need to support those people who are working in the right direction to help business as a whole move in the right direction. The London Assembly and through the Mayor, our role is to set the overall strategy. So the London Plan needs to be the first thing that we look at, and that needs to have the environment and climate change as like a stick of rock written right through the London Plan, which means getting rid of Silvertown Tunnel and airport expansion and incinerators and lots of other things we'll talk about. It's got to be done. That can only be done at that level. Households can't deal with those issues. So it's about supporting households to do the right thing, giving them the information, and then from them taking the pressure upwards to actually change the systems that people live in.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So those are our 5 questions. I'll ask each candidate to give their closing statements, and if the candidates are willing, possibly wait for another 5 minutes after, just to answer 1 or 2 of the questions we've got in the Q&A section, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you very much. Neil, if you could please give your closing statement. Everyone has 2 minutes for it after you.
Thank you very much. Well, I spoke at the beginning about the need for optimism and not threats, and the power of carrots and not sticks. It was all very broad brush, so I'd like to finish with some more specifics, really. So in London, the Conservatives are committed, as I mentioned earlier, to a zero emissions bus fleet in 4 years and making it easier to switch to electric cars. And as I mentioned, I personally would quite like to see some innovation on physically smaller vehicles, such as the Japan's K city cars idea. And also electric micro-mobility, such as e-scooters and e-bikes, which I mentioned. I think they have a huge amount of potential to replace cars for those sort of medium distance journeys and not so medium distance. I mean, it's a long way from one end of this GLA constituency to the other, and I'd quite happily get all the way around it on my e-bike. And in fact, they're slightly contagious. In the Conservative group in Sutton, there are now 5 of us with e-bikes. This is the problem with these things, is they keep spreading. I'm also very pleased that the Conservatives in London are completely opposed to Heathrow expansion, and on our watch there will not be a penny of TfL money going towards that. I think there are some difficult areas around industrial energy use and domestic heating. Claire mentioned air source heat pumps. I have a friend with one of those. The difficulty is they work at a lower temperature. You need larger radiators, and so then retrofitting becomes a tricky problem. It's not just replacing the boiler. I think the way we get there as well is by empowering that human ingenuity that we know we have in London to find those solutions to all of those problems. And that's why I'm pleased that Sean Bailey is committing 50% of City Hall's economic development funding to good growth and green jobs. And I also love Sean's Green Tech Challenge and Green Tech Hub plans to invest in the companies that will tackle those problems that need solving. But the world doesn't stand still, and so it's not just about specific policies at election time. I think over the coming years, I'm certain that there'll be new ideas and new opportunities. And so if I'm elected to represent Croydon and Sutton in City Hall, I'll be pushing both in public and in private to seize those opportunities and to bring people with us to that clean future that we know is needed and that we know is possible.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Next, could I please have Claire?
Thank you. Well, it's been a really interesting evening, and I really enjoyed kind of hearing your questions. And I think what excites me is that this is no longer a fringe issue. This is no longer something that sits at the edge of people's policies. This is right at the heart of every policy. And certainly for the Lib Dems, we've taken this right to the heart of all of our policies around London, and they all centre on working with our local communities to make them sort of stronger, more resilient, cleaner, more suitable. And to be served better by public transport and by other options. And, you know, we actually need to be reinventing our high streets, but, you know, creating them in a way that works for where we are now rather than for where we were a few years ago. And I think we've got this unique opportunity to do that. You know, one of the things that as Liberal Democrats we're famed for is our kind of community work and our sort of, you know, staring at potholes and looking concerned and doing all that kind of business. You know, we are people who will be out there talking to the local community, as I've said, as everybody has said, but you know, I just want to highlight again that local community solutions are the way forward. And often when, you know, parties have been in power for a long time, they maybe don't always do that in every single part of Croydon or every single part of Sutton. They're not necessarily getting out there and listening to voters. We're doing that, and we believe that we can represent the views of people like yourselves, but also you know, walk that line between people who, for example, want to kind of open our roads again and people who want to keep our streets safe. And we need to have those conversations, and this has been a great opportunity to do that. But as Lib Dems in the London Assembly, we would represent the views of local communities, and we have put green policies at the very heart of everything that we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Patsy.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to also thank everyone for the excellent questions. Some of them are challenging, but really important. And it is difficult to spend 90 seconds responding. There's not enough time to tackle these huge issues, but I hope I've given you enough to know where I stand on tackling some of the climate issues. in my opening remarks, I said that the time to talk is over and now is the time to act. So put your trust in me on the 6th of May and I'll pledge to tackle all those housing issues. It's not just about making sure that we insulate our homes, making sure that they're eco-friendly, making sure that the CLTs and other forms are there, that we can actually make sure that our housing needs are met. It's about green spaces. It's about making sure that we plant more trees, and fossil fuels needs to be out of everybody's thinking, but we need to actually make sure that people are informed about all of those issues. And it's not because people don't want to know, it's just they're busy struggling with their lives. So we need to actually make that link to make sure that people have the information so they understand all the things that they're tackling, all the things that are challenging for them. The tackling climate change and issues relates specifically and directly to some of the things that's going to make their lives better. We do need to have better transport. We can't all afford electric cars or the bikes and the electric bikes and all of that, because those are quite expensive as well. There's many people in communities in different parts of Croydon that that would be something that they would love to have and they can't afford it. So we need to make public transport better. Trams, yes. Is there the money to put them in? We need to see if that's going to happen, because those pledges have happened and they've not literally stood the test of time. So we need to make sure that we have safer streets for our children. We need to get people out of cars and make it so that the incentive is there for them to want to come out of cars. You've heard some differences between the candidates, but there's much that we do agree on, I think, and as most of us share the same vision, and there is a public consensus that climate change needs to be tackled. However, to act now, what we need is leadership. We need fresh representation to bring people together. And I will work with all the other candidates. You've heard Peter, you've heard Claire, you've heard some of the issues, that so many things that we can do together. So I would want to actually make sure that with the community, with the activists, with those who are entrenched in these issues, can work together. It's not a carrot, it's not a stick, it's working together. I'm really passionate about that because we need to tackle these issues. So I'm going to be straight with you. In Croydon Sutton, it'll be a clear choice, I think, between me and the Conservative candidate. And I sincerely believe that my values, our values, my belief in the community and a sense of fairness and justice for all are the right values to represent Croydon Sutton. And to deliver those, we must tackle the climate emergency and all the issues which I can't cover in 2 minutes or in the last few seconds I've got. But what I can do is pledge that I will do what I need to do. So vote for me on 6th of May. And I've gone over, but thank you.
Patsy. Oh, I've forgotten who's talking now. I think it's just Peter left. Thank you, Peter.
Right, thank you. It's been really interesting this evening, and I've been really pleased to see that all the candidates have been putting forward some positive ideas, some ways of tackling the climate emergency, improving our environment. And these are things we can all work together on. My background as a civil servant and in current work with charities, I'm used to working across party with people. It's, you know, politics should be about making life better, about improving things. It isn't just about fighting with each other and having arguments in the press and things like that. It should be about making things better for people. So yes, there's lots of things for us to work on together, which is great. Unfortunately, with each of the other parties, when I look through, they also have policies that I think this is really bad. This is going in the wrong direction. This is actually making it more difficult to tackle the climate emergency, or is making the climate emergency even worse. And that's the problem I have. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in the Green Party. Fundamentally, this is about how you vote when on May the 6th. You only have one vote for each of the candidates, one vote for the mayor, well, 2 votes for the mayor, first and second choice, and a vote for the London-wide Assembly. Your choice is, do you vote for a party, a candidate that you can guarantee will be working to improve the climate situation and the environment situation, or will you be voting for candidates that will make it worse? You've only got your vote. So make sure your vote counts and you vote for somebody that you know is actually going to make things better. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. If the candidates are able to wait around for 5 minutes so we can possibly answer one, maybe two of the questions we've received in the Q&A channel. I think I'll start with possibly the most contentious one, which has impacted residents across the boroughs of Croydon and Sutton across London, and it is, will you reintroduce low traffic neighbourhoods where they are supported? So I think give it 90 seconds for each person to answer, and we'll start with Claire.
Well, I don't need 90 seconds to say yes. Obviously, I'm going to be slightly more nuanced than that, but yeah, I absolutely believe that we've really missed an opportunity with the low traffic neighbours. They were so badly implemented across London that I do think we've missed. The conversation has been kind of taken over by the challenges, and so I'm very annoyed about how badly they've been implemented. However, I think there are places for low traffic neighbourhoods and there are places where it doesn't work so well, and each individual situation has to be taken into account. So yes, generally I'm in favour of them, because I think they do help. I mean, I live in Crystal Palace, as I said, and we had some, and it was horrendous. I'm going to tell you, it was horrendous, but not actually because of the low traffic neighbourhood, because there was a series of traffic lights on Church Road which stopped the traffic, but there was idling traffic, and it really didn't work for some people. It worked for me because I like walking. And I did modify my behaviour as a result. I walked to the station rather than, I mean, I usually walk to the station, but occasionally I would drive if it was late at night or whatever. I didn't, I got a bus. So it definitely works, and it does change people's behaviour. However, it doesn't work if you are an emergency vehicle trying to get through. It doesn't work if you're an elderly person, because for any of you who kind of know the Crystal Palace end or the top end, it is very hilly. And it's not suitable for people. So I do think my short answer is yes, where people are supportive of low traffic neighbourhoods, where there is proper consultation, absolutely. But I do think it's not a one size fits all solution, and we do need to be careful that each local area kind of is treated differently so that the best solution can be found.
Brilliant, thank you. Peter.
I wrote an article for Inside Croydon back in October, which I reproduce normally at this point in social media discussions, because it's a bigger discussion than just low traffic neighbourhoods. They are one tool that we can use, but the fundamental thing is about reducing travel by car that we've discussed already. Low traffic neighbourhoods can be really effective. They need to be really well designed, which I agree there's been problems with. Rosamund Kissi-Deborah, who's the one whose daughter unfortunately died, had air pollution. She's standing as a Green Party candidate. She's our Green Party candidate in Lewisham. And I know she has serious concerns about low traffic neighbourhoods because of some of the changes in terms of where traffic was going and who was being worse affected by that. The short-term effects of low traffic neighbourhoods were quite bad for some people. We need to look at the long-term situation and whether they're the tool that we can use, but it's not a one size fits all. It's not a automatic, oh yes, LTNs are brilliant, but they are one of the tools we need to use. So yes, I would agree putting them back in. We need to consult with people to make sure they work, because without public engagement, you're just forcing something onto people, which people are naturally going to rebel against, whatever it is. So you need to bring people with you, and we need to look at the designs to make sure that, as we've discussed earlier in the evening, people who are already disadvantaged, it doesn't make their life even worse. So we need to look at how those LTNs are designed. Fundamentally, I'd like the entirety of London to be a low traffic neighbourhood, because we should just have lower traffic. We need a lot less of it. But yeah, so that's probably enough for now.
Thank you very much. Patsy.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, again, there's much I agree with Claire and Peter. I think we do. LTNs need to be in place, but again, we need to bring people with us. The consultation was awful, and so we need to do much more of that. And it is not just the only solution that we have to try and sort out the emissions on our streets. And again, it's been commented upon. It's the deprived areas, the different communities who are affected the most, that we need to make sure that we do things differently. I do believe that, and again, agree with some of us on the platform, that we need to reduce the number of cars. I don't think it's about just talking about electric cars. We do need to reduce them vastly. And it's making sure that there are the right incentives and all the transport links and the way in which we do our streets, and obviously making sure that the spaces around schools are much more healthier. So yeah, there's lots of things that we can do, but we need to make sure people are with us. And just a little nugget. Did you know that if you removed all the parked cars in London alone, you'd have the equivalent space of 80,000 new Trafalgar squares? That's how cars impact on us in our society. So locally in Croydon Sutton, we can do much more, but we need to make sure that it is something that doesn't disadvantage those that can't afford to deal with the solutions that we are presenting them with. And it's already been said, the communities have the solution, so let's make sure we have those discussions with them.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, Neil.
Thank you very much. Well, it's going to be a slightly boring answer, so I'll add in a couple of extra elements, otherwise we'll just boringly all agree. I think the point I would make is that although the three-letter acronym LTN is new, the concept of closing roads, plug no entries, one-way streets, all these things to manage traffic flows are not new. So in my ward in Sutton by Braisted Close, there is what I suppose is you would now retrospectively call a low traffic neighbourhood. It's been there for decades, and it closes off what would otherwise be a huge rat run right through the middle of the ward. And in fact, the response that we always get from residents is a terrible fear that we might remove the bollards that have been there since the year dot. I'm actually the Conservative Environment and Transport spokesman in Sutton, and so I was responsible for formulating our policy there, which is that I agree with others. I think the government is partly responsible for this, but also the mayor and also Sutton and Croydon Council implementing these things in a terrific rush without proper planning. So the policy that I proposed and that our group agreed is that we should pause all of the schemes, do a proper consultation to find out what people want, and some proper planning so we have schemes that actually would work properly. And I'm very pleased to say that not only is that our policy for the Sutton Conservatives, you may have noticed it's Sean Bailey's policy, which I'm very happy to endorse, and I noticed it's now also the Sutton Lib Dems policy. They've recently taken out all the low traffic neighbourhoods and are now consulting again on 2 of them. And I think I would pick up as well on 2 other points. One is Peter's point about people feeling bullied. That's the overwhelming response I get talking to people. Quite a lot of people don't mind the principle, but they feel they're being bullied, and it really builds up a lot of resentment. And the final point I want to make is about ANPR cameras, which I do have a real problem with. I think it's one thing to have a bollard, and I realize that creates problems for emergency vehicles. What I have a real concern about is replacing those with cameras that automatically fine people, because it feels to me like a bit of a sort of government ambush on people who might make an innocent mistake, and they may drive around an area, get fined multiple times on the same day without realizing. And I realize it's very easy to sit in a meeting like this and say, well, you should read the signs. But for one, the signs can be hard to see. And for 2, I'd rather people driving look at the environment around them and the pedestrians and cyclists and things, not just reading small writing on hard to see signs.
Fantastic, thank you all so much. I don't think we've got time to ask the other questions just because we have run over. So what we will do, if the candidates are happy to do so, is send you the questions that we've got in the Q&A chat. And if you would like to respond to them, you can, and then we can send the answers out to all of our members, including anyone who attended today that's not signed up, if that would be okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for giving us your time. We understand that it's a very busy period for you. And I think that's it. I'm not quite sure how to end these things. I've never done one before. Just thank you all very much. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Patsy. And thank you very much, Neil. Everyone, thank you.